whose food security and livelihoods are most at risk due to the pandemic. According to the latest UN estimates, almost 690 million people went hungry in 2019, up by 10 million from 2018, and by nearly 60 million in 5 years. High cost and low affordability also means billions cannot eat healthily or nutritiously. Across the planet, the report forecast the COVID-19 pandemic could tip as many as 132 million more people into chronic hunger by the end of 2020. At the same time, at the end of 2019, 135 million people across 55 countries and territories were estimated to be experiencing crisis level of acute food insecurity, according to the 2020 Global Food Crisis report released in April. In addition, 75 million children were stunted and 17 million suffered from wasting in 2019. This is the highest level of acute food insecurity and malnutrition at crisis levels since the first edition of the report in 2017. More recently, a July 2020 analysis by FAO and WFP identified 27 countries, no world region is immune, that are on the front line of impending 2019-driven food crisis as the pandemic's knock-on effects aggravate pre-existing drivers of hunger. The analysis warns these hotspot countries are at high risk of, and in some cases are already seeing significant food security deteriorations in the coming months, including rising number of people pushed into acute food insecurity. This is why FAO is particularly concerned about the pandemic's impacts on vulnerable communities already grappling with hunger or other crises, including the desert locust outbreak in the Horn of Africa and beyond, economic shock or insecurity in Yemen or the Sahel, for example, as well as countries that rely heavily on food imports such as small islands, developing states, and countries that depend on primary exports like oil. For example, the Sudan has recorded its highest ever number of people experiencing crisis or worse level of acute food insecurity at 9.6 million people between July and September 2020. In Somalia, the numbers in crisis or worse are expected to almost triple compared with pre-COVID-19 estimates. In Afghanistan, 13.2 million people are acutely food insecure, representing an increase of around 1 million since the implementation of COVID-19 related measures. Also, countries significantly dependent on primary commodity exports are and will be affected by the significant reduction of demand from developed countries. Countries in Africa can't export their produces, so their revenues will continue falling. Also, it has been harder for small islands and territories because tourism, their major source of revenue, has been closed down and will probably continue like this or significantly slow down until a vaccine or a treatment becomes available. Small islands and territories are also in many cases oil export dependent. They also depend on remittances, which have been reduced by 20%, are vulnerable to climatic shocks and depend on food imports. Vulnerable groups also include small-scale farmers, migrant and informal workers, pastoralists, and fishers who might be hindered from working their land, caring for their livestock or fishing. They will also face challenges accessing markets to sell their products or buy essential inputs or struggle due to higher food prices and limited purchasing power. Informal laborers have been hard hit by job and income losses in harvesting and processing. Millions of children are also missing out on school meals they have come to rely upon. Many of them with no formal access to social protection, including health insurance. In addition to agriculture, other sector-specified effects are also expected. For example, fish provide more than 20% of the average per capita animal protein intake for 3 billion people, more than 50% in some less developed countries, and it is one of the most traded food commodities globally. Thus, the impact on the livelihoods of fisher communities, food, food security, nutrition, and trade, especially in those countries which rely heavily on the fishing sector, is expected to be significant. Developing countries are particularly at risk as COVID 19 can lead to a reduction in labor force and affect incomes and livelihoods as well as labor intensive form of production. Of particular concern is sub-Saharan African where most of the countries experiencing food crisis are and where the pandemic is spreading at crucial times for both farmers and herders when people need access to seeds and other input and to their farms to plant. For Krishi Sanjeevani, Fibia Johnson.